Good morning, everybody. So here we go. We're going to try our first online lecture. And our first topic today is going to be on what happens after Caesar's assassination on the Ides of March 44 BC. And so if you remember, he was killed, and when he was assassinated, it left a power vacuum that's going to be filled by three new powerful generals, creating what we call the second triumvirate. They're going to be Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. Okay, you want to know all three of them, make sure you know all their names. Mark Antony and Octavian were two very ambitious men. Both wanted to really rule after Caesar was assassinated, and there was discussion that either Mark Antony or Octavian would have been named as the heir after Caesar would have died, but of course he was assassinated instead. One of the most important things that happens in 43 BC is that Octavian had a sister named Octavia, and Octavia will marry Mark Antony. That's going to help tie the triumvirate together. If you remember the first triumvirate, there was a marriage ceremony. Now in the second triumvirate, there'll be another marriage ceremony. So again, Octavia will marry Mark Antony, and Octavia was the sister of Octavian. So they tie it together, and then what happened is they looked at their map of Rome, and they also kind of divided up into areas. The only thing you really need to know about this is that the island of Sicily went to Lepidus. And you guys remember where Sicily is, just off the coast of Italy, the southern coast of Italy. So they created this triumvirate 43 BC, and after a few years, Lepidus tries to take over Sicily from Octavian. He tries and he fails. When he tries and he fails, he is ousted from the triumvirate. Now we know why this is important from the first triumvirate. Once you had that happen and Lepidus was ousted of the triumvirate, what that meant, we only had two men left, Mark Antony and Octavian, both very ambitious, both wanting to rule over Rome, and it's just going to be a matter of time until the tension between those two men rises up. So, meanwhile, one of the other big parts of our story here is Mark Antony takes a little trip to Egypt. Now, if you remember, about 40 BC, who's in charge of Egypt? It was, of course, Cleopatra. So Cleopatra is in charge of Egypt, and when she is there, and Octavian goes to visit, Mark Antony goes to visit Cleopatra in Egypt, he falls for Cleopatra. So first Cleopatra gets Caesar, and now Cleopatra seduces Mark Antony. Now, of course, there's a problem with this, and the problem with this is we already know Mark Antony is married to Octavia. Well, at first, it wasn't too big of a deal, but then it will become a bigger issue once the tension between Mark Antony and Octavian boils over. So we jump ahead a few more years to the year 33 BC. And in 33 BC, not a surprise, a full-out civil war develops between Mark Antony and Octavian. It was at that point that Mark Antony made the decision to divorce Octavia and form an official alliance with Cleopatra. So then the question is, who does this help? On one hand, you might say, well, this helps Mark Antony because he's got the Roman forces loyal to him, but he's also got the entire Egyptian army. Well, it might have helped with the Egyptian army a bit, but the reality is this comes back to hurt Mark Antony. And the reason this hurts Mark Antony is because for every extra Egyptian soldier he's getting, he's losing the loyalty of the Romans. Because remember, one of the key things about Egypt and Cleopatra is they're not Roman. Remember, Egypt was not part of Rome at this point. And so Octavian was very smart. He would send out stories that Cleopatra was a sorceress and casting evil spells on Mark Antony, and how Mark Antony betrayed the pure Octavia. And then, of course, Mark Antony divorced Octavia as well, and all of this. And so he ends up losing loyalty from the Romans. Well, this goes on, the civil war, for a couple years. There's a battle in 31 BC called the Battle of Actium. It's a big naval battle there, and at that battle, the forces of Octavian win. They defeat Mark Antony, defeat Cleopatra. When Cleopatra and Mark Antony are defeated at the Battle of Actium, they see all is lost, and most people know what happens. At that point, they both commit suicide. Mark Antony is going to stab himself, and Cleopatra is going to get bit, not bit by a snake. That's in all the movies. The snake comes and bites her, very dramatic. She actually just drinks the poison of a snake, and they're both dead. So that takes us to 31 BC. Mark Antony is dead. Cleopatra is dead, Lepidus is out of the picture, leaving us again with one man, Octavian. Well, then Octavian comes back to Rome in 29 BC, and then we get to this pivotal moment where Octavian is going to get a new name and a new title. Octavian, from this point on, is no longer known as Octavian. He is now known as Augustus, a name you've probably heard of before, same guy. But not only is he known as Augustus, he also takes a couple of new titles. One is Princeps Civitatis, which translates to first citizen, which he claims he is. And then he also takes another title in 27 BC, Imperator. Imperator, which of course means emperor. And so now in 27 BC, Augustus becomes officially your first Roman emperor. Now, this leads to a very important question, because if you remember when Caesar tried this, Caesar took the title of Rex, and what happened? He was assassinated. So one of the great kind of discussion questions I usually like to have in class is, why would the Romans have accepted Augustus as an emperor? Because when Caesar tried this, he was assassinated. Now Augustus is able to take this title, and he's going to rule as emperor until he dies in the year 14 AD. Do notice we're about to go from BC to AD dates now too, so pay attention to that. So there's several reasons for this, but one of the most interesting things is a document that we have that's in your packet, which I want you to read. It's a document called Res Justia, so make sure you look at that packet, and I want you to read it, and when you read it, you'll see pretty much all these great achievements that Augustus does. Now, what you'll also see when you read this is this entire document called the Res Justia was designed by Augustus to make himself look really good. A lot of the things in there were true, but it's also very clever PR, kind of selling himself as this great leader. But the more important thing about Augustus is he does something that has not happened in Rome for over 100 years now. He brings to Rome what is called the Pax Romana, and the Pax Romana is the Roman peace. At the end of the day, what Augustus is able to do is restore order and stability to Rome. Rome is a civilization that has gone through slave rebellions and pirates, if you remember, and of course generals like Sulla, and of course the Spartacus story we talked about, Civil War, and now he brings in peace, a 200-year peace starting from the time of Augustus that will bring stability to Rome. It's not going to be perfect. They're going to have some conflict, they're going to have some civil wars, but it's not going to be as crazy as what we have seen right before the midterm. Now, the Romans accept this because he brings stability. One of the things I hope you notice in this is not a unique story to Rome. If you think about this, many times in history where things are chaotic, things aren't going well, you see an individual coming to power saying, hey, give me all the power and I will bring stability and order. Obviously, you think of the 20th century, the Hitlers and the Mussolinis, the Stalins are really good examples of that. So now Augustus is in power, and what's going to happen? Well, one of the things Augustus will do right off is establish the first Roman dynasty. It's going to be called the Julio-Claudian dynasty. We're going to go through all the Julio-Claudians in this part of our lecture today. And so a few things more about Augustus before we move on to the other Julio-Claudian rulers. If you're not familiar with them, they're a lot of fun, a lot of crazy emperors, and we'll get to them in a little bit. But one of the things about the Roman Empire now under Augustus is you still had a Roman Senate, but one of the things Augustus instituted is something called the hereditary principle in the Senate. And the hereditary principle basically stated that you could become a senator if your family members were senators, you've inherited it yourself. So it really makes the Senate really a bunch of puppets to Augustus and people loyal to him. Other things about Augustus is he established the Praetorian Guard. If you've never heard of the Praetorian Guard before, they are the kind of elite guards that guarded the emperor, and that was something that they play a big role in Roman Empire history, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later. He was very strict in his control of people's lives. He controlled what would be written. He would control marriages. He would control how people dressed. Very controlling individual, but again, he brings stability to the Roman Empire. So eventually Augustus will die in the year 14 AD, as I mentioned, and he will be followed by the rest of our Julio-Claudian emperors. So what I want to do next is get into those crazy Julio-Claudian rulers. A lot of fun. We'll talk about all of them, and that's going to be for our next clip. Thank you.